even though I didn't have that certification yet, I still was hired. So I want to impress that upon folks that are listening, that you don't necessarily always need to have that certification to get the job. So don't let that hold you back.
Do you ever have so many questions and no one to ask, so they're just wasting away on Google searches you'll forget about in an hour or so?
We had that same problem, and that's why we created the RD2BE podcast, a resource for dietetic and nutrition students looking for answers that their peers don't have.
We are students Macy and Emily and registered dietitian Carl Barnes. We engage in conversations and learn from RDs.
Join us weekly as we gain insight into the unique journeys of registered dietitians all over the country.
Welcome back to another week of the RD2BE podcast. I'm your registered dietitian host, Carl Barnes. This is our weekly podcast where we sit down with a different registered dietitian each week to highlight the diversity of opportunity in the profession and really dismantle this notion that there is a traditional career path. And very much so is going to be, we're going to be addressing that today. So excited to be sitting down with Amy Hager. She's a registered dietitian in private practice. And maybe one of the only other dietitians like myself who does jewelry. So very, very cool to have that in common. Thanks so much for being here. We're looking forward to learning about you.
Great. Thanks so much, Carl. Yeah, exciting.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today. So what made you want to start a private practice?
Well, I've done a lot of really fun jobs, fun roles in my career, about 10 years as a dietitian. And I think cumulatively, I was ready to have more independence in my work and really craved the freedom of time in my schedule. I had so many interests outside of my job that I wanted to explore, but I didn't have the time for them. So yeah, that was probably the biggest factor.
Of course. So what was some of, the challenges and the benefits of going through the process of starting a private practice?
Yeah, I guess an unexpected challenge that came up was figuring out creative ways to get office space without spending a fortune. Trying to save monies as a startup, you're trying not to go into debt creating a business. And there's a lot of really interesting ways to do that, but figuring those ways out was the challenge. And then finding opportunities to market myself was another challenge, because I thought, well, I'm open for business. Where are the clients? And then you have to sort of figure out, well, there's a lot of different avenues to putting yourself out there. And that was something different that you don't have in a traditional role as an employee. You don't have to market yourself. So those are probably the two biggest pieces that I had to figure out.
Great. So how do you think nutrition students who want to be self-employed go into the private practice? How do you think as undergrads or even in their internship, do you think students can cultivate the right skills, the mindset to achieve that?
Yeah. Well, great skills for self-employment include organization in day-to-day life, discipline in managing your time. These are some skills that aren't exactly taught in school. These are more like maybe implicit skills that you learn as you go, things that you learn throughout your career as adulting, you might say. If you're the type to slack off when no one's looking, then you might find yourself being challenged in private practice, because you're your own boss, so you have to be accountable to yourself. Then there's technical aspects like working with insurance companies. Those are learnable skills, but the ones to develop really include a healthy attitude towards dealing with frustration, a willingness to use resourcefulness to figure things out, and drive to put yourself out there and connect to other people, maybe with a little dash of courage and risk-taking for good measure.
Of course. So I know you've had, many other jobs working as an outpatient diabetes educator, health and wellness coach at American Express. So what would you mind talking about those jobs a little bit?
It's funny, even when I first got out of my internship, I got the job that I was wanting. Like, I felt like every job that I got was like a dream job in a way. I was like, oh, I really want to work in a wellness center. And that was the first job that I got. I think in our minds, in our internship, we think, oh, I'm just going to end up in clinical because that's what everybody does, or most people do that when they start out. But I had an idea in my mind what I wanted, and then it sort of appeared as an opportunity. And then I'd say probably my most favorite was working as a health coach at the corporate level. So doing employee wellness, doing just a lot of face-to-face counseling, in addition to program creation, in addition to giving talks, that I really developed my skill of public speaking that way. And the fun part about that job was that there was travel involved. So we had the on-site stuff, and then I got to travel to the mountains and to Virginia, and I also got to travel to New York City and do some corporate wellness there. So that part was really exciting, and I just felt like, this, how can I get any better than this?
Of course. So why would companies, or I guess corporations, want a dietitian, need a dietitian? What benefit does that add to their company?
Well, I think when they run numbers, they really show the bottom line that they are reducing healthcare costs. So with our company, we were an on-site clinic inside of the main corporation. So we had a nurse practitioner, we had registered nurses. They were doing simple things like allergy shots, where employees could come down and get their allergy shots or get it looked at during the business day and not have to take time off of work. And then they had the dietitian, myself, there to help with, healthy lifestyle changes and help them cope with stress at work. The fun part about being a health coach, in addition to a dietitian, was that I could talk about other aspects of health and wellness besides diet, like stress management, meditation, sleep habits, and even smoking cessation I did.
Great. So what do you think, what past experiences do you think really helped you create and establish your private practice, if any at all?
Well, I think being able to rely on myself to figure out answers was a big one. One job I had before I was the wellness coach, I was working as an outpatient diabetes educator. Even though I didn't have that certification yet, I still was hired. So I want to impress that upon folks that are listening, that you don't necessarily always need to have that certification to get the job. So don't let that hold you back. But I got trained, and as I was trained in diabetes counseling, I was able to sit for the diabetes exam and get that certification. But then my boss wanted me to get the entire clinic ADA recognized as a diabetes education center. And they just said, okay, here's your task. Like, I could handle it. And I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know where to look. I just thought, well, this is what my job is, so I better figure it out. And they didn't know, so I couldn't ask them, right? So I had to do a lot of research on my own, and back then, you've got the internet, you've got other dietitian resources, there's books. I did a lot with just researching how to put together a program, how to run the data, get all of your pilot testing done, and then apply for accreditation. And we were successful. It was the first diabetes accredited education center and in the UNC Chapel Hill outpatient ambulatory care center. So I was really proud of that.
That's great. So talking a little bit about the certified diabetes education, certificate, what is that? What goes behind it? Like what are the hours? What does that training look like?
For becoming a diabetes educator or getting your center accredited? So to become an educator, you need to sit for an exam, but to qualify for the exam, you need to have, and I might get this wrong, but it's somewhere around 900 hours of face-to-face counseling experience. So you want to have that documented. So as say you start working full-time in a diabetes center, or maybe your clients have diabetes, you would be tracking those hours, and then you'd have your supervisor sign off on those hours. And that right there qualifies you to sit for the exam once you get the hours. And then I used, I think it was the ADA, American Diabetes Association, had a 4-chapter book that I used as a study guide. And then my experience of creating the education program really came in handy, because there was a lot of questions about that. And not a lot of people have that experience. So you would really want to brush up on that section of the study guide, in addition to the pharmacology, in addition to the nutrition. So that, I would say that book was the biggest resource to help me really pass that exam, because it was really nerve-wracking. I felt more nervous about that exam than I did about my RD exam.
Of course. So I know that you've obviously done in-person stuff as well as virtual sessions and telehealth. So would you mind, sharing a little bit about the benefits and the disadvantages of how you felt about it?
Yeah, so I'd say for telehealth, one challenge that comes up is often clients can be distracted while they're on the call. Unlike being in a physical office, they often have their kids or their pets in the background. Sometimes they're even in their car and, they're on their phone, so they think they can just be anywhere. And then I'm like, whoa, we can't talk while you're driving. This is not gonna work. So it's really distracting for both the client and the provider. They're not really absorbing everything. It just leads to a less than optimal session. I like to remind them to dedicate time, without distractions for their session. But one of the benefits of telehealth versus, an in-person practice is that you can see clients in multiple time zones. So it really opens up flexibility in your workday schedule. I tend to start my day around 10 a.m. That's Mountain Time, and then end by 4. So I could see somebody on the East Coast, like in the evening time, and not have to work evenings. So that's really cool. And I'm a morning person, so I like to have a leisurely breakfast. I like to do my workouts, walk my dog. So I can get all of that done by 10 o'clock and then have plenty of time to see clients throughout the day.
Of course. So what unique skill do you think students should have when going into the telehealth field as emerging professionals?
For skills, and I actually just did a video on this for a resource, but I think some of those skills that aren't really taught in school, like staying positive, because you're going to come up with a lot of challenges, and it's a real skill set to stay positive and practice that resilience of getting over something and not letting it bother you, because something might come up in the beginning of your day and it might aggravate you for the rest of the day. And if you haven't solved your problem, it could bother you the next day, and your whole week might be overrun by the stress of something that you haven't figured out yet. So being able to kind of roll with the punches, letting it, roll off your shoulders and just keep going forward, trusting that maybe it'll work out over time or you'll figure out an answer eventually. That is key to be able to stay positive, keep going in your business. Because you don't have somebody else solving your problems for you. And then in addition, I mentioned this before, is just being your own resource. You don't have a manager to talk to. You don't have a supervisor to ask, what's the answer to this? What should I do? You have to figure that out for yourself. So if you're someone that's always asking somebody else for the answer, you're going to be challenged when you are that person for yourself. So, there's a lot of resources out there, but you've got to put yourself out to connect to them. So there's other dietitians doing this. There's a lot of support groups in social media. There's a lot out there that wasn't out there 10 years ago when I was first getting started. So definitely taking advantage of all the resources available will be another great skill.
Definitely. So I feel like obviously you're very comfortable with public speaking and stuff like that. How did you, come to that? Have you always been super extroverted? Were you introverted and had to branch out?
I think on my progress report in grade school, it said Amy talks too much, more than once. So there's a little bit of a knack that's always been there for being able to talk a lot, but it's definitely a matter of practice. So I think what really helped was like standing behind my RD credential, doing presentations at local businesses, and people were like, oh, well, what should I eat? And how, what's the best thing? And I knew I had the training and I had the confidence to stand up in front of people behind my training saying, listen, I can make recommendations. And all of that nervousness about what are they thinking of me was gone because they were looking at me as the expert. So I just felt like over time, practice really helped to get over any kind of fear of public speaking. And I think that definitely the RD credential helped with that.
Of course. Well, I guess my last question is, what kind of advice do you have for dietetic students who are just going through their undergrad right now?
Yeah, gosh. Well, trust that a lot of the information that you're getting and everything that you're learning, more than so many people already, even without any practice, even without any real world practice. Everything you're studying is so much, and it's really valuable, and people really need you. People need people like you to sort out the fact from the fiction, because there's so much every day that comes out that is, some random study or some influencer's opinion that we just, now everybody's on a new trend of this or that. And, to have someone that's gone through the schooling, I think just having the confidence to know that you are that person and you can be that resource is a lot. That's enough right there to get started. So you can, and then the other piece to that, I would say, is that really you can do anything that you want. If you're willing to be resourceful, talk to other people. You know, the excuses that we kind of pop up in our head, like, I don't have enough experience, or I don't know enough people, don't have enough money. You know, those are excuses and barriers that you can get started and go in getting that process started without spending a ton of money. You can even if you're not all the way 100% into it, you can get that process started. So there's nothing really stopping you.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for taking time out to speak with us today.
It's been a pleasure, Emily. I really love sharing experience and advice and being a positive influence for other dietitians.